Hello, and welcome to Hopeful Conversations, brought to you by the Robbie's Hope Foundation. I am your host, Kari Eckert. Joining me today is Jose Briones, writer of Low Tech Life, a guide to mindful digital minimalism. Jose's book is described as an insightful guide to help you reassess your relationship with technology. Jose, thank you for joining us today and welcome to Hopeful Conversations.
Really appreciate to have the opportunity to be here. I'm excited to have this conversation with you about minimal devices and how we can restructure our attention and also our relationship to technology.
Can you offer our listeners a little bit of background of how you got into reducing our devices and our use of screens?
Yes. About 4 years ago now, almost 5, in 2019, at the end of it, I had just got into my first big job out of university. So I had gotten my master's, and I found myself spending a lot of time on the web as a result. I was in a rural part of Georgia, and because of that, there were less things to do. It wasn't as active as Littleton or Denver is here in
Correct.
Colorado. And I found myself looking at my time and using it by watching Netflix shows, being on social media. And I went from a very structured environment with my university and classes and all of those good things to an environment where I was working, but at the same time, I had a lot of downtime now that I had to fill with something. And instead of pursuing more offline activities, I decided to dive deep into the digital world. That created a lot of dissatisfaction in my life. And because of that, I started to look at alternatives to reduce my screen time.
Did other people notice that you were spending too much time on screens?
I think this has been an issue all my life. I don't think it's been something that I have struggled with just recently. I think I've always been interested in technology, and I've always been interested in, being native in the sense of like using as much as possible the technology, what we call digital natives now. So I learned how to code when I was 12 years old. I had my first computer, laptop. I played video games. So I grew up in a pretty decently digital environment, and I personally enjoy that. So I've always had that underlying issue, but in 2019 it became pronounced because I now was an adult and I did not have structure. I had to create my own structure, and in place of other more fulfilling activities that will allow me to have better relationships or just increase or make me a better person, I decided that binge watching and spending time online was my outlet. I don't think it's evil to have a certain amount of time online. However, it was out of control, about 13 to 14 hours per day.
It was that much.
It was, yes. And before it was more like, 4 or 5 hours, watching a show or checking some things. But then I had natural breaks in my schedule as being a student, right? I had to go to class, I had to pay attention, I had to do my homework. So I had natural breaks. Whereas coming into an adult job, I did not have those breaks anymore. And in place of those breaks was just more consumption.
Mm-hmm. You talk about in your book decluttering your life. What did that look like for you in 2019?
Yes, so we all have different levels of clutter in our lives, let it be physical or digital. For me, it was both at the time. And I started to do the same as we do every spring, right? Like, we call it spring cleaning or fall cleaning, whichever season you prefer. But essentially started to audit some of the things that I was doing online, watching Netflix, how many hours of that, being on social media, how many hours of that, playing maybe a mobile game, how many hours of that, or minutes. Sometimes it wasn't that drastic. So I started to do an inventory, and then I started to ask myself, how can I reduce some of this usage and actually put that time towards activities that I actually enjoy, like reading or playing sports or going to exercise. And that's essentially what I attempted to do back in 2019, just before we were sent into a global pandemic. So,
Right. COVID, March 2020, almost the 4-year anniversary
yep.
approaching here. So you took like a digital inventory and you decided you needed to make some changes. Did you go like cold turkey, or it was like a gradual process? What was the process there?
So in the beginning, I did. I had an iPhone and I went to a light phone. So the light phone is a minimal device, is a small device that only has very basic functions. So in the beginning, I tried to go that way. I lasted about 2 months, 2.5 months, and then the pandemic came. And all of a sudden, I had to go on Zoom more often and kind of like do my calendar and do a lot more of my work online. So I bought into the trap of saying, well, I cannot do the light phone anymore because I need, and that's the word that repeats itself very often in my
Neat.
conversations. Yes, I need this or app or, whatever, two-factor authentication, different systems that we were using at the time. And I did not want to look for alternatives. Instead, I just bought into the idea that I need this, therefore I'm going to use it again. So I went back to the iPhone again to communicate and have email and have all of these things at my fingertips. But about a month after, I really noticed that I was back where I had left back in December. So I did not want that. And I decided to give it a full turn try and say, okay, I'm going to go back to the light phone. And now, whenever I find some sort of difficulty or friction, I'm going to try to find an alternative and reduce my dependency on this digital medium.
Mhm. Were finding alternatives hard to use with the light phone, or yes?
Yes, very much so. A few things that I can mention that were more difficult to do, especially as somebody who enjoys and understands how convenient applications are. But for example, going to a concert or the ball arena, if you want to go watch the Nuggets here in town, now I have to go to the ticket resolutions counter with my printed email and my ID, right? So I had to prepare for that instead of just showing the QR code.
Ah,
Or mapping different locations that I had to travel to. Instead of having a smartphone give me directions and speak to me, now I had to get an old fashioned GPS. Similar function, but not the same design. So, it's not as intuitive and very easy to use. Sometimes it can be a little bit more difficult. So, those are two examples. Music as well. I had to replace my music habits by an MP3 player and, go old school instead of relying on algorithmic based content from Spotify. And communication as well, having WhatsApp or other messengers like Facebook Messenger or Instagram was not possible to me anymore. So I had to nudge people to call me more often, which is a friction barrier because not always you have the ability to call and to have a conversation about
versus
something. So I
mm,
had to be more structured in my day, and I have to be more mindful that I wouldn't have access to this tool all the time. So yes, there were a lot of barriers that I had to go over, even flying, right? Like, going to the counter, making sure that you print it or print it in advance. I mean, there's just a lot of little things. And during the pandemic time, of course, going to a restaurant and there were no menus and you
oh
only
yeah,
had a QR code. So I had a lot of meals where I was just asking the server, "What's your favorite thing here?" and just serve me that. Or do you guys have a paper menu? And if they didn't have it, then I would just ask the question and then go about my day. It's a complete reframing of my lifestyle. And it was difficult in the beginning, but over time it got easier and easier because you get more used to asking the correct questions in order to get what you need.
the dependency we have on smartphones when you go through that list is pretty remarkable. I'm wondering, at the beginning when you made the switch, do you feel like making that switch like gave you more control, and like, I don't want to like say, did you have a lack of self-control to not use your device for all of those things that were not feeding you well?
I think in a lot of conversations, especially when it comes to the idea of addiction or dependency, whichever one you want to use. I mean, you can talk about stress, anxiety. You can talk about many different factors that affect someone that has suffered and has had a history of addiction. I myself have had a history of addiction in a different realm that just digitally. I also had, you know, pornography, adult content. I don't know which way you want to go in that. This is quite difficult to um, overcome to a certain degree, but self control is often used as a kind of like a easy fix. So let's just say increase your self control, increase your discipline, and then all of a sudden you will be fine, which is not true. The reality is that the environment in which we are influences a lot of our decisions, not necessarily our level of self control. And there are many studies, right, about how self control and discipline wanes throughout the day, wanes throughout our lives. And yes, we can do more exercises to build some of that. And of course, at the time, I did not have a more regulatory environment that increased my um, desire to be out of these digital mediums. But it's not as easy as saying just increase your discipline. It takes
Right.
time, it takes effort. And when it comes to digital devices, they're so alluring
Hmm.
and they're so mechanically and software engineered in order to exploit some of our vulnerabilities.
Right.
Therefore, we have to guard against that. But when I switch to the light phone, I regained some of that agency automatically because I had to find a different way to do the things that I was simply using my smartphone for.
Hmm.
And even today, I still have a smart device that I use infrequently. For example, when I go on international trips for about a week or a week and a half, I take a smart device. Not
Sure.
because I am not because I don't love my light phone or my basic phone. I also have a flip phone for work. Um, but because it's a week and a half that I'm going to be in a different country that I may not speak the language. And there are a lot of tools that smart devices have that are extremely convenient and very helpful when you're in the middle of a different country.
Certainly. Oh, goodness. Our smart devices and our smartphones, like the designers, you touched on that a little bit, designed by the same people that originally, like a um, slot machine, which is like the most addictive piece of machinery that we had prior to smartphones, like in the notifications and what that is doing to our brain to make us desire to be on them more. Taking control of that has to feel pretty good.
Yes, I think it gives you a lot of cells of, sorry, I think it gives you a big sense of agency again, and it allows you to restore a little bit of your humanity in a sense. Because sometimes you may feel like it's or that you're guided to use some of these apps just by nature of how many notifications they send you or how many nudges throughout the day you get or you open your phone. So when you recover some of the agency, it does feel good, but you have to do something positive with it because you can fall into the trap of just replacing it with another digital device that is not your smartphone. A lot of people that go through this cycle of like, oh, should I use my smartphone? Maybe I should get a flip phone. Sometimes they go into their laptops or desktops and then they're consuming through a different medium. And just because it's not with you all the time, then you feel good about it. What I've have encountered over time is that everybody needs to build a lifestyle they want and that they desire. And creating that concept, that idea that, hey, how am I going to live my day, my week, my month, my year, and my lustrum, I guess, a 5-year term. How am I going to do that? Right. So I think that that's a better approach than just saying do this and it's going to get fixed.
Let's talk about that. You'd say like serve your well being, potentially implementing time zones for use. How do you want to let our listeners know maybe some options to make it potentially a change than just consuming?
There are two different ways of living life. Of course, there are multiple ones, but the ones that I talk about are you can live your life mindfully or you can live your life mindlessly. And if you live your life mindlessly, you're going to fall into common human traps like consumerism and addiction, or other, let it be digital or substances or different things, because that's just the default that looks or society or some of the marketers and ad agencies use to exploit our lives. I just think about the Super Bowl a few weeks ago. What happened every time there was a timeout or a time where they were kind of like, at that time it was a commercial, right? It was giving you an image, and the default is spend money, spend time in our services because they're going to make you quote unquote happy, or give us more of your time and attention. That's the default. Everybody wants to demand that, and even good things can demand that. Like, for example, work can be a bad thing when it demands too much of your time and attention. But if you don't guard against that, if you live your life mindlessly, then work, school, your parents, your peers, your friends can demand too much of your time and attention to a point that they make you unhappy. But if you live your life mindfully and you look at the things that you want to do in a weekly or monthly basis, then you can approach with more intentionality what you actually want to do. Are you watching the Netflix show just because you got a recommendation from the algorithm? Or are you watching the Netflix show because a friend told you about it and you actually are interested in this topic? Do you have guardrails to not continue next episode, just letting the bar fill? Or are you just letting life happen to you? Are you happening to life, as many have put it in the past? So I think those are some concepts and ideas. And to be a little bit more practical, the way that I do it throughout my week is I make sure that I have 3 pockets throughout my week where I can call someone that I love, a friend, family member, that I can spend some time with my wife, going on a date, working out, doing things together. And one is just a personal thing that I like to do. So let it be I go to a coffee shop, or maybe I'm going to go into watch a movie. That's okay. I'm interested in it. I'm going to set apart some time. So 3 buckets that I like to fill every week. And that gives me satisfaction. Then I also make sure, if you have a job, of course, make sure that you are performing, up to par, and that you're giving your time and attention to that job. It doesn't have to consume you, but if you do it mindfully and you plan throughout your day, it's going to be just an easier way of living life in a more mindful and planned out approach. This extends to other areas as well of my life, like finances. I always ask the question to my peers and to my friends and coworkers: how much longer do you want to be doing this? Do you want to be working until you're 75, 80? Or do you want to maybe have the ability to take a year off and go and explore the world, or do something that really gives you satisfaction? I think everybody wants to do that. I think everybody wants to have some time off. And, we have ebbs and flows of energy throughout our lives. Maybe you have children, or maybe you are a teenager, and everybody has a different lifestyle and a different season of life. So, what is it that you want to do during the season of life? And finances do interplay in all of this.
Certainly.
They're quite important. So keep an eye on that as well. Are you just being consumeristic, or are you buying quality products that are going to last you a lifetime or as long as they can, and that you can use mindfully? Or are you just opening Amazon and getting it just because it's nice and pretty and because the algorithm served it to you?
Huh. Mindlessly or mindfully? Mindfulness is such it's still kind of new for a lot of people. It's very, there's a lot of interesting research about being mindful. And I like how you explain just the intentionality behind it versus just going with the norm and going with society always feeds to us. Um, how do you, goodness, you also talk about more is better versus less but better.
Yeah. So, in the book, I put out different concepts. I wrote this about a year ago just because I wanted to have a little bit more of my formal thinking, more stories and base it off of a little bit of research. Sometimes more can be better, but also less is also important to consider that it can be better. So I'll give two examples. You know, sometimes more work can be better for you because you need structure, right? So instead of working a part-time job, you need to work a full-time job in order to gain that structure. Sometimes less is better because it allows you to be more resourceful in that sense, right? Like, or maybe you're in a season of life that allows you to do less, but it gives you more life satisfaction. When it comes to digital areas, I think less is usually better because it allows you to do more meaningful activities outside. However, many of us have replaced all of our meaningful activities for online activities.
Yes.
Many of our meaningful activities engage in some sort of digital platform. So a lot of people, for example, they like gaming. And gaming, when I grew up, used to be by myself. We didn't have the very massive multiplayer games that I was not playing with my friends until way later, like, probably during my college days. But nowadays, kids do play together, right? Instead of playing outside. And that's a lot of factors that we don't have time to get into here, like design planning and parks and availability for, kids to actually have safe streets where they can play sports or anything just outside. That's a completely different topic than the one that we're talking about here. But yes, sometimes using digital for connection is possible, right? Like, hey, I'm going to connect with my friends and I'm going to play this game that we are really into. But if you do it mindfully, you're not going to be doing that every day for 5-6 hours during your day. You're going to say, like, hey guys, let's do it for 2 hours. And maybe during the weekend, instead of playing the game, maybe we go outside, we go to the mall, we go on an adventure or something like that, that allows you to be more deliberate in your choices. So the approach of less is better has to do a lot with simplicity. So the less things you have to take care of, the more simple your life will be, and the more time you'll have to actually do the things that you enjoy. So, for example, I have a dog, and I love my dog. He's a German Shorthair Pointer called Luca. However, that is quite a responsibility for me. I cannot leave the house for more than 12 hours because he needs a walk. So that it's more of an onus on me to take care of him, right? If I didn't have him, I will have less responsibility and maybe more time to do the things that I truly want to do, right? Like going out or whatever. But I will also have less life satisfaction because I love my dog and he has been great to us, right? So you kind of have to determine whether you want your life to be overly complex with more services and more subscriptions and more digital platforms to keep up, or you want your life to be simple and say, I'm going to have one platform where everyone can contact me. I'm not going to be on TikTok and Snapchat and Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. I just named 5 out of many platforms that are out there. I'm just going to have one. It's simple, it's clear. If people want to find me, they can find me there. They can reach out to me. And, I'm okay with that. But it takes that mindset shift for each and every one of us to determine what is it that we want out of life. Too much complexity or more simplicity?
I like that, but I feel like, is it doable? Because, like, here I am, the executive director of a nonprofit, trying to communicate. Communication is and we're very socially media driven consumers of who are trying to reach. And there's so many different platforms that people communicate on. And sometimes I really struggle to keep up with them. How can I simplify that? Like, how do I let people know that this is where I communicate? Because, like, taking care of Facebook Messenger, Instagram, DMs, like, and I'm 51, like, I didn't grow up in this world. So how does a person do that? Like, maybe at my age?
Yeah, when it comes to simplifying some of the platforms, I think you have to be aware that you're going to lose some opportunities and that you have to be okay with that. So, for
Uh-huh.
example, we connected with one of your teams sending me a message through Instagram, right? But I don't check Instagram all the time. I think it took
Right.
me maybe like 4 or 5 days until I saw it because I have a blocker that only allows me to get Instagram or access Instagram during like 2 days of the week.
Okay.
All of the other days are blocked. So I have to be okay with, hey, this podcast may not have happened, right? We may not have gotten connected. And I have to be okay with that. I'm going to lose certain opportunities, but not every opportunity is necessary for me. So that's the first thing. You have to recognize that there's going to be some quote unquote opportunity lost. And
But
if
that
you're
might be okay.
yeah, and if you're okay with that, then you can say and start letting your circles know, this is where you can find me. Here's my website. If you want to contact me, this is how you contact me. And if somebody doesn't want to contact you that way, or if you lose an opportunity because of that, let it be so. I've always said it this way: if someone wants to contact you, they will find a way to do so.
That's very good advice. Very good
And
advice.
and for us to feel like we have to be available to everybody and every platform, it's not healthy for us. It's better to just say, you know what, I'm going to hone my craft and I'm going to be very good at one thing. The digital economy is very real. It's extremely profitable, and a lot of people are working remote now. We are doing this podcast remote. It allows us to do a lot of amazing things. But when we let that thought of, I have to be in every platform and monetize every platform and be the best in every platform, you will not be the best in every platform. It is not possible. You just have to be really good at something and say, these are my boundaries. Now, if you're somebody that wants to become a creator and, in the digital content area, maybe it makes sense for you to have multiple platforms. But even then, do you want to be checking all of these messages and not creating the content that you're actually valuable for? So you have to make a values assessment, a cost benefit analysis of what truly matters in your life and whether the barrage of messages and allowing everybody to contact you is actually worth your time. So that's how I look at it. And for you, you can just simplify it, right? Like, just say, hey, we're going to have an Instagram. That's the only way that we get contacted. And then because we bring a lot of value to people, eventually they'll find a way to contact us. They'll create an Instagram account. They'll send us an email to our nonprofit email. You have to be okay and say, this is my boundary. This is how I'm going to use my time best. And this is the platform that I'm going to use to reach people. If you don't want to use that platform, maybe it's not good that we work together. And if you want to work together, then come find me on this platform.
It's good advice. Thank you. I was just being honest and vulnerable, which I truly believe in, and being vulnerable as humans.
I appreciate it.
In your research for the book, how did you find a lot of information about the correlation between a person's mental health and the time that they spend in digital platforms and in with social media?
Yes, there are a lot of studies out there that speak about this, and there is a positive correlation between screen time or the higher it goes, right? The higher your levels of stress, anxiety, and depression can be. There's plenty of studies out there that have been done in multiple subjects and multiple people that showcase that the more you spend time on these digital platforms without an intent, that's the kind of like caveat, right? If you don't have an intent for using these platforms, then you're going to increase your levels of stress, anxiety, and possible depression to a certain degree, depending on what you're using. So I talk about nutrition sometimes when it comes to the digital space. We don't have this yet. So if you go into your iPhone or Android device, it just shows you a number.
Mm-hmm.
It tells you this is your screen time, 4 hours, 5 hours. For me, at some point in time, was 12, 13 hours. But the reality is that is broken down in so many different categories. And we have to,
Productivity.
and we have to be mindful of that it's different for me to spend 4 hours on Zoom because I had to do meetings and different things and I was, working, than 4 hours on Instagram. There is a very big difference when it comes to that. But our devices do not show us that. They show us kind of like the breakdown, but at the end of the day, people just end up focusing on the big number. There's not like a macro nutrition slide that shows you like, hey, this is the best way to use your device. Maybe use it more of this. And we have to be mindful of that, have intent when it comes to this reality and say, okay, yeah, I use my phone like 5 hours, but 2 out of those 5 hours were actual work. That's okay. I mean, I'm not going to feel guilty about that. But we talk about the numbers so much that we instill a lot of guilt into people. Another thing that the research showed is that people are really attached to their smart devices, and rightfully so. They contain a lot of personal and sensitive information, even your card or form of payment sometimes, even your ID. Here in Colorado, you can have your ID on your phone, right? And if you were to lose your phone, is quite something, right? So we have become quite attached to these smart devices to a degree. And we have to think about that, whether that's something that we desire in our lives or it's something that is actually important. But yes, there is a very clear correlation between screen time and dependency, sometimes stress, and also helplessness. A lot of people do feel helpless because they say, I cannot leave this platform. All of my friends are here. What would I do if I, didn't have this app or this service available to me? And sometimes those may be true concerns, right? They may not have built a lifestyle that is more offline than online, especially nowadays. But it can be done. It just takes a little bit of effort. It takes a little bit of time, and it takes a little bit of trial and error. Don't be afraid to fail in this space, especially when you're transitioning from more online time to more offline time.
It seems like it takes a lot, the desire to do it as well.
Yes, it does. The default is there. The default is listen to Spotify, listen to YouTube, Apple Music, subscribe to all of our services. The default is create a Facebook account, create an Instagram account. If you want to advance in your career, create a LinkedIn account, consume content, get a certification, right? Use tech in order to advance your career. That's the default. That's what you hear. Those are the images that are portrayed out there. So the desire is definitely going to be less present, especially because the marketing is so heavy on the other side. Yet you have to come to a realization of what is truly valuable and how I want to build my life for the next 30 years. I think a lot of the people that I have come in contact with are parents. I'm not a parent myself, but a lot of parents eventually start seeing the effects on their children, not spending time with their children or not spending time, having meaningful conversations with their children. They may be spending time together, but the phone is in the middle, right? Mediating the conversation.
Right.
Yet a lot of parents are starting to look for alternatives because they want to be good examples to, their kids.
Yeah. I feel like working with teenagers so many times at the beginning of trying to learn about the issues surrounding youth mental health, adults would just say, if kids would just put their phones down, they would not have a problem. If kids would just put their phones down. And certainly there's a shift. I don't feel like this situation applies just to teenagers or just to adults. Like there's parts of this in every single demographic age group, however you want to break it down. And then there's just a whole nother conversation of parenting. Like, what are you modeling to your child? When your child's trying to talk to you, is that device in between the two of you? I think there's a whole lot there. And then like the desire for parents to control a young person's device. I happen to think like that's a very tricky, slippery slope. Like if I have trouble with my devices, I go to the teenagers in my life to help me fix them. There's a lot there.
Absolutely. And if I would mention something, is that there is a fine line between enough and too much. And we haven't learned what that means in our digital space. So think about enough apps and too many apps, right? Like, when is your phone going to stop installing apps? There's millions of apps out there. So when is it too much and when is it just enough? And we haven't really found a way to truly engage in that conversation. And that's something that parents can do and start maybe thinking with their kids, right? Like there are a lot of kid friendly phones or teenage friendly phones. Gab, Bark, TrueMe are three names that come to mind. There's another company trying to come out with another one called Techless right now. So they're working on those projects, right? Because it's quite a real issue for parents. Yet I didn't get a phone, I think, until I was maybe 13, 14, right? Nowadays it's a little bit earlier. But maybe we can start asking some questions like, what are the alternatives maybe to not introduce this until later on in life? For parents, right? Maybe it's a AirTag. You want to track your kid, you want to make sure they're safe. Use an AirTag or use some sort of, I don't know, kid-friendly smartwatch or something like that doesn't train them too early into the digital void that is the internet.
Oh, It's kind of hard to watch all of this change so rapidly. And like, you can go to a restaurant and watch, like, at different tables, what's happening. Like, you can find a couple that's my age in their 50s and both of them are on their phone, whatever. And you can find of families sitting and visiting, and you can see a young parent with a very young child and they're both on devices. Like, there is no middle road yet.
Not yet. And that is not to say that before we didn't have distractions either. Parents were not interested in their kids even back in the 80s or 90s. To say the least, there were different types of parents even back then. Some of them just gave them more manual toys to be distracted. Nowadays, they give them digital toys. Of course, there's a little bit of a difference between a digital device and a physical product. However, it's the same thing. Interacting with another human being is an intentional thing. It's not the mindless thing to do is color, do something else, don't bother me. The mindful thing to do is to, hey, I'm going to interact with you and I'm going to make sure that this time that we spend together is special.
Conversation, connectedness. I like so often reflect when we're talking about this topic is like that Mark Zuckerberg created Facebook for human connection in his dorm room at Harvard. It wasn't for a lot of the things that we now have and the things to come.
And for many years, that was true. For many years, that was true until they used it as a monetization platform where your attention and your time was more valuable than the connection that they gave you to your friends.
Yeah.
And yeah, we could talk about how when tech goes wrong, right? It starts with a noble cause of connecting people and trying to do good things. And then it quickly turns into a completely different monster that we didn't expect.
Yeah. Oh, this has been a really good conversation. I think we could have a whole nother podcast and go a level deeper for listeners and maybe we'll do that. It's been great visiting with you, Jose. We end every podcast with the same question, and that is, what does the world need to hear right now?
That's a big, big question. And thank you for that. Thank you for having me on the podcast. I think what the world needs more of right now is just time and attention to the things that you actually value, not the things that people have put in your mind that they value, not the advertisements value or the big tech companies value, but the human connection and time with family and friends that you truly value. You need to give more of your time and attention to what you want and not what you have been presented to.
It's good advice. Thank you, Jose, for joining me today on a hopeful conversation. Be sure to tune into our next episode. And until then, remember, hold on, pain ends.